Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, keep calm and stay strong. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Mick Dawson.
Okay. This is the East Anglia, which was part of the United Kingdom. And if you look at the map of England, this is the part that bulges out into the North Sea. And if you go to the north of our county there, you can go as far north as you can, and it's just way up there to the Arctic. And that red spot on there indicates where we were in. This is a photograph of the permanent buildings which the Air Ministry started building for the Royal Air Force. Although they'd been the Royal Air Force in 1918, they hadn't had permanent bases. And in the 30s it was decided that because of the war was coming along, because of what was happening in Europe, they ought to have some permanent bases. And they built 35 of them from Scotland down through the east coast and around to the west coast in Wales. Only 9 of them actually had a paved runway. The remainder were grassed airfields, something like 60, 70 acres of mown grass. The direction of takeoff in those days was decided by the windsock, and the clearance to go off was a green light from the control room. And these were the sort of permanent buildings they had. This is the radio. Wonder where that comes into the place. This time in our lives, we didn't have electricity in our village, and we had to have a battery-operated radio. And this was our main communication. We had to have 3 batteries on it to get a signal from the BBC. And this is what we heard.
I am speaking to you in the cabinet room at 10 Downing Street. This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note, wishing that unless we heard from them by 11 o'clock, that they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland, the state of war would exist between us. I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been achieved, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany.
In our small house, there was a number of men congregated there with my family to listen to this broadcast. And when that broadcast finished, these men stood rigid, staring, grey-faced, and they just didn't know what to do. And everything was very silent until my dear old mum, with her face in her hands and crying, said, "Oh no, not again." Because her and my father had been subject to the bombing with the Zeppelins in World War I. And so that was the start of it. These are the sort of aircraft that we had at that time. And of course the first instruction we had from the radio was to black out for all lights in any house or shop, workshop or anywhere had to be blacked out. And people would be fined if they didn't black out. As you can see, we had to have a time of which you had to close the curtains. Not only close the curtains, these two are having fun putting on a blackout. And because all the street lights were taken out, the local government people painted the curbside or the sidewalk as you call it. It was black and white so that people didn't fall over. Hopefully they didn't fall over. The second thing we had to have, gas bombs were issued within 6 weeks of declaring war. Now, it was worrying because we thought, as the Germans used gas in World War I, they were going to start with gas in World War II. And everybody was fitted with the gas bombs. The children, 5 years old, would have a Mickey Mouse mask, and babies, for those 6 months, would have a crib, and the mother would have to pump the air into the crib through a filter. And of course, we all had to carry these things, and you was issued with a cardboard box and a piece of string to carry. If there was gas around, or there was a warning of gas, they would use these wooden wrappers. The wardens would be told of the gas likely, and they would put these on. We'd all have to put our gas masks on. The other thing we had to do was to prove shelters. We was asked to provide our own shelter, area shelter. And for us, we was a block of 8 houses, and we was able to dig a huge hole in the ground just behind us in a spare piece of land, and we built that for ourselves until they issued us with what is shown here as a Morrison shelter. This Morrison shelter was just dumped over into our front yard, and you had to pull it into your house to direct it. When you think that the corners, the angles of the corners were 8-inch angles, that wasn't very easy to do. And we had to put it in on a ground floor roof. And of course, once we got that in our level roof, there was hardly room to get around it. But we used it as a table, and we had to use it as an air raid shelter in an office. This is a different type of shelter called the Anderson shelter, which was used in towns and cities where they didn't have any ground cover. You can see that they tested it out. In the UK, at this particular time, nobody had identity cards. And of course, they had to then put this into action, and it was a man from the local council who came round to our houses on a bicycle, and these cards and the register, and he would write out the identity cards in your own house. And because our house was the 4th one into the village, mine was 104, and I was the 5th member of our family, 104.5, and that's how they registered. They were supposed to be unable to copy them because they had watermarks in. And you will see on the right-hand side, people changed their address. And if they changed their address, they had to go back into the city and get the new stamp put on there. And of course, then we had ration books. Rations were severe. 2 ounces of cheese per week, 4 ounces of meat. When I go around with some of these young lads to the aircraft and say to them, well, when you next go to the McDonald's and get a quarter pounder, just look at that and say, well, that's what Nick had to eat for a week. So, but everything was rationed, clothes, crockery, bread. Now this is an area of the old Methuselah radar, which was set up. The towers all the way down the east coast were something like 300 feet tall, lattice wooden towers. And they had a huge net between the towers to try and detect aircraft coming into the UK. the Royal Observer Corps, that was a non-military organisation sponsored by the government, were our lookouts, and they had access to the information from this radar, and they could warn people of the direction of any aircraft coming in. The other thing that we did, because the government said that if the Germans landed in England, they would want to know where to go. And so they decided, they got all the direction signs in the whole of the country, because they thought the Germans would use them to find out where they wanted to be. However, you can see, London went for a journey. There the old arms stand up. Of course, we had to evacuate men, women and children from London and the main areas where Hitler decided to have this mass bombing with the Blitz in London, and not only in London but of all the other major cities in the UK. There were Blitz on the population, and so they had to be evacuated. They would bring them out of there. Some came to the States, some went to Canada. Others were sent up to the northeast of England and Scotland, where they thought they were well out of the way of the reach of the Germans. Also, while we're talking about evacuation, if there's any Canadians in our audience, we evacuated all our gold from the Bank of England to Canada. We just hope we got it all back. This is the kids with the labels on. Coming back from Dunkirk, 1940. You probably all seen the movie Dunkirk, and this is how one of the boats came back. And every vessel that was capable of crossing the channel was used to get this 500,000 guys back into the UK. Now when they got back into the UK, they was a bit bedraggled. They was in the clothes that they stood up in. And one of the guys who lived in a village quite close to us walked into our village, and he had his greatcoat on, and it was white with salt, as was all his clothes, because he'd been in the water for hours, and he hadn't had time to get on. And when they fed them, they gave them bread and jam, or bread and jelly, as you would say. So they weren't very well received coming back. The ladies, of course, were part of the wartime effort, and they were, those who didn't go and serve with the forces were taken into the land, and we had a land army. You can see them working in the fields. This is this is an emergency, and during the Battle of Britain, these people would rush out of their aeroplanes on the grass and fly off. Of course, we have the Spitfire. And the Mosquito. These are one of our main medium bombers. They're Wellington bombers, and it's a triangular formation for the fuselage and the wings, and it's all fabric covered. But there was thousands of them manufactured, and they were flown by guys from various parts of the world: Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Poland, Czechoslovakia. And this is one of our 4-engine bombers, the Sterling. Not very popular, but it was a great airplane. And of course, this is the most popular aircraft that we had during World War II, the Lancaster. This is what we call a artillery site. The units on the right-hand side are what are known as sounders, and they were able to pick up the sound of enemy aircraft coming in. And when they picked up that sound, that information was passed over to the searchlight, and the searchlight was switched on, and they tried to trace these aircraft and catch them in the beam. And then on the other side of the searchlight, there was an artillery gun which would shoot the aircraft. And actually, one Sunday evening, out with my friends cycling around the community, we actually saw one of these happen. We saw them catch it into the beam, and we saw the artillery actually shoot it down. Now this is our local city, Norwich, who had a draw today, not like Arsenal. And this is the blitz that we had. You can see devastation all over the place. And this one, as you can see, there's a double-decker bus in the crater. This weapon here is a landmine, or a parachute bomb. It's dropped from the air, and it has 3 parachutes on, and the whole idea is when it gets to within 50 feet of the ground, it's supposed to detonate and obliterate factories. That was the whole idea. But we had one of these dropped in our village, and it dropped into a small meadow where some cows were feeding. And I went to the farm that morning with my milk can to get the milk into the dairy. And when I went in, the farmer's wife said, "Mick, you didn't come round by the lily bits, did you?" I said, "Yes, I did." She said, "You mustn't go back that way because there's a big farm." My husband saw it this morning, and all the cows were rubbing their heads against it. The police are there, and they're going to deal with it. And within half an hour, we were evacuated. The whole village had to be evacuated. And they were able to detonate it and make it safe. Now, we start the second phase here. Is 1942, when Uncle Sam decided to send us the 8th Air Force. We had to provide another 41 airfields. By that time we had already built something like 300 airfields. And to fit another 41 into the areas suitable for building, where there was no hillside and mountains and so forth, it came upon us, the East Anglia, to provide the area. Now when the surveyors came along and they discussed the taking up the land, they wanted 150, 200 acres of land to build one airfield. And of course we was producing food from this area, and the general public were not very happy about giving up the production area. However, they did so, and we built 41 airfields. And this is the airfield that I worked on in January 1943. It's Wembley. It's got the 3 runways. The main runway was 6,000 feet long. The 2 short runways were 4,200. The main runway direction was northeast, southwest. The prevailing winds in the UK are from the southwest. This is the area of all the 41 airfields. The ones in white are B-17 bases, those in the gold are B-24 bases. And you can see that from London up to the north coast of Norfolk is something about 120 miles. So we've got another 41 airfields in there, and on each airfield there would be approximately 30 aircraft, and the one that I was working on was extended to 50. So when they had a take-off in the morning for a raid over Germany, if they sent 20 airplanes for 41 airfields, that's a lot of airplanes to get up in the sky through 15,000 feet of cloud, because we didn't have wall-to-wall sunshine like here in California. They had to climb out to that height, and that was only done by the navigator, who flew out so many minutes this direction, so many minutes the other, and climb out. And unfortunately, from time to time, there were in mid-air collisions. These are the B-24s from base with the letter D. This is the climb-out areas they were supposed to use. Now, we had a problem with fuel in the UK. We didn't produce much fuel at all in the UK. We had two small wells in the Midlands, and we imported our fuel from the Far East and the Middle East. And when you get all these airplanes from America, they wanted 1,200 gallons each airplane to fly a mission to Germany. It's a lot of fuel. And so it had to be shipped from the US, from East Texas, through the Gulf of Mexico, out to the Caribbean, and across the Atlantic. But unfortunately, the Germans had their U-boats outside the Caribbean, and they used to take a lot of the ships down. And so they decided that the best thing to do would be to get the oil up to the east coast of America. And so they decided to build an inch line. That's what they called it. And there was two pipelines built from East Texas up to New Jersey, where they then filled the tankers. That pipeline took 340 days to complete, some 1,200 miles. It was cost about $19 million at that time. And so they was able to fill the tankers there, and they could ship them across to the west coast of England, where they went through the refineries and then sent out to all the small bases. So you think about the logistics of getting that fuel for the aircraft. Without the fuel, no aircraft. And the same thing had to happen about the bombs. They had to be shipped out as well as the 50 caliber ammunition for the guns, because we didn't have it. And then on top of that, on each base, there was something like 2,500 guys who needed food, water, and all the other commodities of life. This is a snapshot of the Ford factory in Chicago, Detroit, where they produced the B-24s. And I'm told that they produce one B-24 every 75 minutes. I have been told by people who were closer to them than me that that was down to 60 minutes, but I think if we stick to 75 minutes for one aircraft, that's a good way out. This is the guys on the ground having a wash day, and they're using the security fence to hang out their washing. See the farmhouse in the background, very close to the and of course they have to have the ablutions for shaving, washing. This is a combat officer's mess. These buildings were built with bricks of 9 inches by 3 inches by 4 inches. They were single brick buildings, and they had to have a pier every so often to keep them stable. The roof was asbestos sheets. I mean, asbestos sheets. Now, and so that was the type of building we had. These are the bonds in the bond dump. They came crated with wooden crates. The wooden crates came in very, very useful for the stoves that the guys had in their billets. They was limited on the amount of fuel they had for the stove, and the guys used to grab these boxes as soon as they could, so they could all do all of them. Nissan huts. There's the Nissan huts. You'll see the one stove pipe coming out. There would be 35 men living in one of these huts. They had a concrete floor, and the outside was rigged with tin. You call them huts, we call them Nissan huts. And of course, with the weather in England, how damp it is often, the floor would usually be very, very wet. So it wasn't very comfortable. But later on, they was able to put a floor covering down, which made it a little bit more comfortable. This little farm set up here was right in the middle of the airfield, and they told Mr. Scott that he would have to vacate it because that was right in the middle of the airfield, and he said, I don't want to vacate it. And he stood his ground for a long, long time, and eventually they agreed that he could stay there, providing he got rid of his cattle and all the other stuff he had, and put chickens in there, and all the eggs he supplied would be into the base. So there was an agreement there with Mr. Scott. Of course, we had snow. This is the hospital ward, believe it or not. This is one of the operations buildings. And this is what happened to some of the boxes which the bombs were brought in with. They were stacked up outside on the dispersal sites. This is the flight planning. And this is the briefing room, where they was told where and what they're going to do. Unfortunately, there's always a problem. We had a fire here. This was a B-24, and it was very, very close to one of the gas installations. This gas installation has 6 3,000-gallon tanks, just buried below the ground surface. And fortunately, the fire crews were able to contain it, and it didn't get to the gas station. We believe it was sabotage because it was very close to one of the roads, and it was completely destroyed. Of course, there's always congratulations for medals. And this is a wonderful thing because the WWII came in by the railway station close by. This is in the machine tool workshop. All the equipment that we brought over to America, we had to have transformers to change the voltage. We also had to change the frequency on these particular drilling machines and the lathes and all that sort of thing used, because we only had 50 cycles and you wanted 60, so the speeds were all wrong. Control tower, when the aircraft were returning, most of the senior officers used to reflect on the balcony there to see how many and which aircraft came back. Snow there, they had to clear the runway of snow. Put land on. This area here, believe it or not, was the storage area for the Northern bomb site. It was a secure area. It was solid concrete with bars rolled in the concrete, and it was monitored day and night by MPs. When the navigators were ready to go off on the lead squadrons, they would have to go to this building, pick up a northern bomb site with the MP, and they would be transported to the aircraft, and he would put it into the aircraft. And that was then had to remain in the aircraft until, if they returned, and then it was reversed. It was taken out and back into the storage. In fact, we have a very good demonstration in the B-17 hangar of the northern bomb site. If you haven't seen it, it's worth a look before you leave today. One of the crews. Anybody know who this guy is? You're right there. Van Miller. We were working in the hangar, and suddenly 2 airplanes came into the ramp in front of the hangar, and they looked exactly like a B-17. But suddenly, cargo doors opened, and all these guys came out with their beautiful instrument cases into the hangar, up onto the breaches, and started playing their music. I was working up in one of the gantries, and I was making quite a lot of noise because I had to file a hole in a metal box to take it from a 3/4 inch hole to an inch hole. And that made an awful lot of noise. And I heard the band playing, and suddenly something come and hit me on the shoulder. And I looked down, and there was this officer that I could see. And he said, "You'll have to stop making that noise, boy. We can't play the music with you making that noise." I said, "Well, who are you?" He said, "I am Brett." I said, "Just a moment." So I climbed down, and he patted me on the back and said, you stop that noise for a while, and here's 2 tickets. We're playing tonight in the hangar, and we're also playing tomorrow night. You can come both evenings if you like. But I said, "You've got to play me in the mood." And he said, "Oh, we'll do that. That's fine." And so In the Mood was played for me then. You might be interested to know that Glenn Miller played the first that tune first time in the island across Catalina Island in 1940. That was where it was prepared. That's the aircraft he came in, and I remember those doors very well, and I tried every way to try and find out where it was, and one of my colleagues who worked with me in Hangar 2 came up with it, and it's what they call a C-108. There was 12 of them made by Boeing. 2 were left to Glenn Miller for the band, and the other ones were used with the senior officers for officers close to the battle. In fact, they could be used as a passenger aircraft, and in fact they did have one which had 64 seats in it. It's interesting, if you're interested in that, go to Google and go into C-108 and you get the whole list of them. And this was his first aircraft. Of course, it was shortly after this that it was lost across Chapman. The rest of the band got across to Paris, and they waited 3 days, didn't know where he was. And they heard the news that he was lost at the Chapman. And I don't think they've ever actually found his aircraft, but it was said to be in the same area that the aircraft coming back from Germany could discharge it on the unused bombs. So, there's questions there. There's several different views of it. And of course, the method of transport on the place, they'd all like to have a jeep, but there wasn't enough jeeps to go around, so the bicycle became a necessity. There's the guys out having fish and chips in newspaper. And this is the oblique memorial that's left at Wembley by the 392nd Bomb Group and all the other units that were connected to it. It's on a piece of land in my village. My father at that time was the chairman of the parish council, and he was the one that organised donating this land to the 392nd Bomb Group for this memorial. And it's used every year. It is attended on November the 11th by usually somebody from the embassy in London, and definitely by the station commander in Lakenheath and the other base, and they send a party as well, and the local minister, and there's usually 300 to 400 people surround this area for the memorial service. So that's to tell you, the American Air Force has never been forgotten in around our area. This is the village sign of my village. It shows the church and the sheep. This is the village church, built in the 1700s, and it just had a normal tower, and the spire was added in the 1800s. It's about a 50-foot spire, and it stands on a hill, and you can see that tower for miles around. And a lot of the guys who were flying back said, oh, we was all lucky to see that tower on the church. Now, this is the inside of our church, and the cross in the foreground is the cross that was in the chapel on the base. There was a chapel. It was a dual-type building. It was used as a gymnasium and a church. It was fitted with a spring maple floor for the gyms, and that had various altars. And when the base broke, this cross was removed and processed and rededicated into our church. And there it remains today. This is the village school and the pubs. The guys used to go down to the pub on their bicycles, have a few pints of beer, and was unable to ride them back. They got the MPs out to take them back, and the next day they come back and they'd have to buy the bicycles back. This is the railway station I said earlier where they picked up the mail. When something like Palm Springs Station, isn't it? This is Sandringham, and a visitor there with the priest. Of course, there were celebrations when the war in Europe eventually finished. She's happy, isn't she? And there is himself, our king and queen, King George VI and Elizabeth. Unfortunately, we come to the point where we go to the cemetery. Unfortunately, hundreds of people lost their lives in various servicemen lost their lives. And this is the cemetery just outside Cambridge. Somebody here was saying today they went close to Cambridge recently on a visit. And it's kept in immaculate condition. It's wonderful. And we must say, thank you to those who made the sacrifice for our freedom. Now that's the soldier boy. And then we go to the next part of the program, which is the Cold War. I was transferred from the army to this place in 1949. To go back to 1944, the British government closed three of their bases, and it was to enlarge them, ready for the B-29s to come in to help the 8th Air Force. And so these places were started with renovations. And so this is the new layout. The main runway, 9,000 feet. The two short runways, 6,000 feet. And they had to be widened because of the width of the wingspan of the B-29. So there was a lot of work going on there, but of course there was a bit of a lull in it, and the contract stopped. But we eventually got it going again, and I was very fortunate there, being a young guy coming out of college, part-time college, and we had a new lighting system put into these particular bases, which was similar to an automatic telephone exchange. During the wartime airfields, all the cables went back to the tower. They had great big switches to switch the lights on there. But this was remotely controlled from the tower. They could select a certain section of lights they wanted, press a key, and that would pulse out a number, a 6-figure number, and at the other end it would bring in a little set of relays, train, and then it would bring on the lights. So it was a bit complicated. It had problems with it, and I was well up on it, and I used to travel between Sculthorpe and Lakenheath and Marham, where they also had the same system and sorted out their problems. There's your B-29, I think you know that one. And here's the KB-50. And this was during the Cold War. And we had the 420 bomb group there, and so they had to refuel the B-29s and also later the B-45s. There's your B-45. I don't know how many of you recognize that particular aircraft, because it was the first jet bomber, the 4-engine jet bomber that you used. And it was there because it was to carry the atomic bomb. We had atomic bombs on the base, and in the two areas, I and J areas, the two parts of the bomb had to be kept separate. And when they was delivered in the 124s, they used to park on the end of the runway and used to unload them at night so nobody could see them. Sorry, let me go back to this B-45, there was an article in the Flight Review, and it was said, skullduggery from Sculthorpe. 3 of these airplanes were taken into that hangar, and all the American markings were taken off them, and the RAF roundels were put on them, and we had RAF crews up there flying these aircraft. And eventually they took off, and we didn't see them for weeks. And eventually they turned up again, reversed it to the hangar, rounded off, American markets put back on again. And I didn't know until several years later that those RAF crews flew from Sculthorpe up over the Norfolk, over the top of Russia, and flew over Russia. They got chased on one occasion and get back into Germany, but they went back and they landed in Persia because they wanted to get photographs of Russia. And it was all very, very secret, of course, at that time. And this was the next airplane that we had, which was the destroyer, the B-66. This is a twin-engine jet, and it was assisted in landing with a parachute. This is the control tower at Skelthorpe. Barrack blocks. And these are what we call tobacco houses. When the Americans came in 1949, the influx of families started, and every piece of accommodation that they could find within 30 or 40 miles of Skelthorpe was occupied by families. And so, big problem. They wanted the people on the base, the key people on the base. So they decided to build 800 tobacco houses. We paid for the houses in place of tobacco. And the Americans paid $1 for each house. But this is then now, in recent years, but there was a very, very good construction by Whitby. They was cast on site with concrete. They had 2 or 3 bedrooms, hot air heating. You know, it was beautiful houses. Changing the subject completely, during the time I was at Skelthorpe, I was selected to be posted to the island of Gan in the Maldive Islands. I thought you might be interested. The Maldive Islands is situated some 400 miles southwest of Sri Lanka. And there's about 96 islands there. And the RAF occupied this most southerly island of Gan, which is 20 minutes from the equator, as a staging post. Because the aircraft, to move our troops from UK to the Far East was no longer done by troop ships, it was done by air. And so we had to have staging posts. We flew from UK to Tripoli, and then we had to fly down through Nasser's corner, because he had thrown us out as well. We wasn't allowed to fly over Egypt, and go back up to the Yemen, into Aden, and then from Aden to Gan, and then Gan on to Singapore, and Hong Kong, and there were other trips went through to Australia. This is the island, 1.5 miles long, 3/4 mile wide, okay? And the buildings all on one side. And according to Hans and Lottie Pass, to the explorers, that it was a mushroom island and a coral island. And when the aircraft used to come in, we all used to say, sit it down gently, otherwise you'll break us off. But it was a beautiful coral island. Of course, I had to be there on my own. My wife was left at home with 2 little children. And, that was, I went back to Skelthorpe for 2 years, and then we went off to Cyprus and started our world tour. Before I play this, in 2012, I was back in the UK, and I was invited, we were invited, to go to this ceremony. And it was a gentleman who was something like 5 years old during the war, and the Liberator had crashed close to his house in the village, and they wanted to erect a memorial. And it took him all that time to get it agreed. And so you can remember now that the British people do not ever forget the presence of the United States Army Air Force in England in World War II.
Norfolk village of Galveston has a strong affinity with the United States.
Jason Wise's the special or should I say essential, relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom,
which grew even stronger this afternoon with a special service to commemorate the lives of 10 American airmen killed here 68 years ago.
Sons, brothers, and cousins disappeared in a ball of fire 3,500 miles from home.
They were on board a Liberator that took off from nearby North Pitman, bound for a bombing mission in France as part of the D-Day operation. Within minutes, the plane was forced to swerve to avoid another aircraft. It stalled and came down on an empty cottage in Galveston. There were no survivors. Exploding bombs also killed 2 American firemen tackling the blaze. This was the 9th mission this particular crew flew. They were part of the 492 bomb group whose casualties were so heavy it was disbanded shortly after the tragedy at Galveston. Relatives of one of the airmen who died had flown over to the States for a 2-day ceremony. Paul de Brewer was a gunner on that fateful flight, and it's thought he took a photograph of the group. Just 20 years old, from Cromwell, Indiana, he's pictured here with his niece Naomi. Sadly, she wasn't able to travel to England, but her sister Nancy and other members of the family from across the various states spoke to me about their sense of pride.
It's not just a DeBrewer family situation. America needs to know that 68 years later, we're still being thanked by the British. It is monumentally important.
The village of Galveston has always felt it owes the Americans a debt of honor because of what happened here on June the 4th, 1944. It organized the funding and the creation of the memorial.
I think it's a fundamentally important to remember the sacrifice because these young men came a very, very long way to help us in our hour of need. And a goodly number never went home. I think that has to be remembered. The other thing is that within this small village and communities like this all over the UK, incidents like this would in the rural areas brought the war home to people.
George Washburn was an American liberator pilot who served in East Anglia. Cynthia Harmanovsky now lives in the States, but was born in Galveston and remembers the crash.
We're hearing of these things practically every week, with crashes. It was different. If it happened this day and age, it would be sensational news.
A number of wreaths were laid, one of them by Jimmy and Sam de Brewer. They never knew their great uncle, but today they were ensuring that he and his colleagues on that liberator flight will never ever be forgotten.
May they rest in peace.